Hello everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. The house on Hillside Lane, in the quaint outskirts of a sleepy little town, nestled among weeping willows and lush greenery, stood the house on Hillside Lane. It was a grand old structure with weathered shingles and ivy creeping up its sturdy stone walls. Most of the townsfolk considered it charming in a timeless, historic way, but to me, it always seemed to carry a subtle air of unease, as though its walls whispered secrets when no one was listening. When my Aunt Martha passed away, she left the house to me in her will, and though I had been fascinated by it as a child, the idea of actually living there felt both exciting and strangely unnerving. After a lengthy process of settling her estate and preparing for the move, I finally arrived at Hillside Lane with all my belongings in tow, unaware of the lingering presence that awaited me. The first few days were a flurry of activity, unpacking boxes, wandering through the echoing hallways, and exploring the nooks and crannies of the old house filled my time. The rooms were spacious, with high ceilings and large windows that flooded the space with light during the day. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows deepened, each corner seemed to take on a life of its own, whispering secrets from the past as they danced along the walls. It was during the quiet of my first week that I noticed the odd noises. Each night, as I lay in bed, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly from the attic above. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling, old beams creaking and groaning as they adjusted to shifting temperatures. But these footsteps seemed too deliberate, too rhythmic, to be explained away by natural causes. Curiosity soon began to overshadow my unease. One evening, armed with a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, I decided to investigate. Slowly, I ascended the narrow attic stairs, each step creaking loudly in the stillness of the night. The air grew colder the higher I climbed, carrying with it the familiar smell of dust and old books. The attic was cluttered with boxes and aged furniture draped in moth-eaten sheets. As I swept the beam of my flashlight around, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, I found nothing. The footsteps ceased, replaced by the sound of my own breathing. With a strange sense of disappointment, I headed back downstairs, convinced it had all been in my imagination. But the next night, the footsteps returned, louder this time and more insistent. Frustration and sleeplessness pushed me to confront the attic once more, yet as before, I found nothing but stillness and dust. It was then that a heavy unease settled over me. The consistency of the sounds suggested intention, as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate. I tried to ignore the noises, but they became harder to disregard, especially when, one night, something new happened. I awoke to find a trail of muddy footprints leading from the front door to the staircase. Ascending to my bedroom, the mud was fresh, wet, and glistening under the soft light of the hallway lamp. What made it more disturbing was the absence of footprints leading back out. Fear coiled tightly in my chest as I followed the trail, each step heavier than the last. The footprints ended at the foot of my bed. Heart pounding, I searched the entire house, turning on every light and checking every possible hiding spot. But again, I found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no lingering presence, only the chilling reminder of muddy footprints with no return path. Unable to sleep, I began researching the history of the house. At the local library and through conversations with elderly residents, I uncovered a grim past. Decades ago, the house was owned by a recluse named Harold Greaves. Harold was known to be an eccentric man, obsessed with the occult and rumored to conduct bizarre rituals in the attic. Neighbors often complained about strange noises at night, similar to those I had been hearing. Then, one stormy evening, Harold vanished without a trace. No one ever saw him leave the house. After Harold's disappearance, the house changed hands several times, yet none of the owners stayed long, each reporting strange happenings and an overwhelming sense of being unwelcome. Armed with this new information, my fear shifted into determination. I couldn't allow this mystery to linger if I intended to make this house my home. That night, as the footsteps began again, I climbed to the attic, this time determined not to be deterred. I sat quietly in the center of the room, the flashlight off, my senses sharpened by anticipation. Hours passed in the cold darkness until I felt it, a sudden chill in the air. A figure began to materialize before me, faint and flickering like a dying flame. It was an apparition, translucent but unmistakable, Harold Greaves. He didn't speak, but his presence was overwhelming, pressing against my senses like an invisible weight. Summoning all my courage, I spoke directly to him, asking what he wanted and why he lingered. Harold's ghost did not answer in words, but as the room grew colder, images flashed through my mind. I saw fragments of strange rituals, an obsessive quest for immortality gone terribly wrong, and a final desperate act that had bound him to the house. I understood then. He was trapped, unable to move on, tormented by the failure of his experiments. With a newfound sense of sympathy, I reached out to local paranormal experts. Together with a medium, we prepared a ritual to release Harold's spirit. The process was intense and draining, the air thick with tension as ancient incantations filled the attic. Finally, as the last words were spoken, the apparition began to dissolve into a gentle light that drifted toward the attic window and faded into the night. Silence settled over the house, deep and peaceful. The footsteps never returned. The muddy prints were gone. Sometimes, when the house is still and quiet, I feel as though Harold's presence lingers, not in a menacing way, but as if he's watching with a kind of gratitude. The house on Hillside Lane feels lighter now, free from the restless energy that once haunted its halls. And so, I've come to love this place, its history now intertwined with mine. Its once dark corners filled with sunlight and calm. The last passenger. It was late autumn when I first noticed her, an enigmatic figure wrapped in a tattered grey coat, always sitting at the back of the night bus I drove each evening. The bus would fill and empty in predictable cycles, the familiar ebb and flow of students, late shift workers, and the occasional wandering soul trying to escape the chill of the night. But she was different. Unlike the others, her presence seemed almost spectral, defined not by noise or motion, but by the heavy stillness that clung to her. She would sit quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and her pale, almost translucent face cast in the dim glow of flickering fluorescent lights. Each evening, as my shift drew to a close, I would catch glimpses of her in the rearview mirror, her eyes downcast, and distant, as though weighed down by the gravity of some untold story. Her routine was unchanging, as steady and predictable as the ticking of a clock. At exactly 11:15 p.m., she would step onto the bus at the downtown station without a word. The faint rustle of her coat accompanied the soft clink of her fare slipping into the box. Then, as if drawn by an invisible tether, she would drift to the back of the bus and sink into her usual seat. She never carried a bag or any belongings, just the weight of her solitude and the air of a mystery that grew heavier with every passing night. The other regulars on my route had become familiar to me over the months, their brief exchanges of pleasantries and quiet nods punctuating the long hours behind the wheel. But not her. She never spoke, never nodded, never acknowledged anyone. She existed in a bubble of silence that even the hum of the engine and the chatter of the city couldn't seem to penetrate. At first, I tried to dismiss her as just another passenger, a weary commuter lost in her own world. But something about her drew my attention night after night, an invisible thread that tugged at the edges of my curiosity. She became a silent obsession of sorts, my thoughts often drifting to her in the quiet hours of the route. Who was she? Where did she go every night? Why did she never speak? My mind created stories for her, tragic, romantic, mysterious. Each theory seemed more fantastical than the last, but none offered the comfort of an answer. The bus route wound its way through the heart of the city before branching off into quieter, more desolate streets where only a few passengers remained. She was always the last to leave, stepping off right before the final stop at a deserted lot near the old depot. The place itself seemed swallowed by shadows and filled with the rustling of dry leaves, as the chill of autumn deepened into winter. Driven by a mix of concern and a need to understand her story, I made a decision one evening. a decision that would alter the quiet normalcy of my life. I would follow her. That night, as the bus hissed and groaned to a stop at her usual destination, I watched her through the mirror. The doors opened with their familiar mechanical sigh, and she stepped off, her coat billowing slightly in the cold breeze. The moment felt surreal, the air heavy with anticipation. After ensuring the bus was secure and locked, I slipped into the night, following her at a cautious distance. The lot was bordered by thick woods, the ancient trees gnarled and twisted, their skeletal branches clawing at the moonless sky. The gravel crunched softly under her shoes as she moved gracefully, yet with an undeniable heaviness. I kept my distance, my breath catching in my throat as I watched her silhouette drift farther into the darkness. Just as she reached the edge where the faint glow of the city lights surrendered to the oppressive gloom of the woods, she stopped. My heart pounded. She seemed to sense something, her head turning slightly as though she had caught wind of my presence. Then, without warning, she stepped into the shadows of the forest, swallowed whole by the night. I hurried forward, unsure whether fear or curiosity propelled me. But when I reached the spot where she had vanished, I froze. There was nothing. No trace of her footsteps in the damp earth. No sound of branches shifting, no path leading deeper into the woods. Just silence, thick, suffocating silence that pressed in on me from all sides. A chill coiled around my spine as I turned in slow, hesitant circles, scanning the darkness for any sign of her presence. The air felt colder here, sharper, as though the night itself was holding its breath. I called out softly, my voice barely audible, but no answer came. Perplexed and unnerved, I searched the surrounding area, hoping to find a hidden path or some clue to her disappearance. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. She had vanished, completely and utterly. Without a trace, the stillness of the woods felt unnatural, heavy with the kind of quiet that suggests you are not alone, even when all evidence says otherwise. My mind scrambled for explanations. A trick of the light, a product of fatigue after so many nights of little sleep, or something stranger, something beyond rational thought? I returned to the bus in a daze, replaying the evening's events over and over in my mind. The following night, I scanned the downtown station with a mix of dread and hope. Would she appear at 11:15 p.m., slipping her fare into the box as usual? But she didn't, nor did she the night after, or the night after that. It was as though she had never existed, as if her quiet presence had been nothing more than a spectre, caught briefly in the woven threads of the living before vanishing into the ether. Weeks turned into months, and the mystery of the last passenger lingered in my thoughts like a half-remembered dream. I asked around, described her to regulars and colleagues, but no one else seemed to recall her. It was as if she had been a ghost, a spirit passing through on her way to somewhere beyond our understanding. And so the night bus continues its route through the sleeping city, the world moving on around me. Yet in the silence between stops, in the rustling leaves and the quiet sigh of the night wind, I sometimes hear her memory whisper, a soft reminder that not all who wander are lost. Some are just passing through, leaving behind only questions and a trace of their presence in the stillness of the night. The reflection in the mirror. It was a seemingly ordinary Thursday evening when the line between reality and impossibility blurred for Sarah. Her day had unfolded like countless others, absorbed in the demands of her marketing job where deadlines pressed relentlessly, and the coffee pot never seemed full enough. Seeking a moment of respite from the constant rush, Sarah decided to spend the night in, armed with a glass of red wine and her latest book club selection. After a warm bath that seemed to melt away her tension, she stood before the bathroom mirror, towel drying her hair as steam curled lazily through the air. The mirror fogged with condensation, and her reflection slowly revealed itself, almost dreamlike. As the haze dissipated, she was about to wipe it clear when something made her pause. Her reflection stared back with an intensity that felt off, though she couldn't put her finger on why. Dismissing it as the result of exhaustion, she continued drying her hair, moving with the habitual rhythm of her nightly routine. Just as she set the towel aside and glanced at the glass again, it happened. Her reflection blinked, not in sync with her own movement, but deliberately, almost mockingly. Sarah froze, her heart pounding so loud it seemed to echo in the tiled room. She stared, unblinking, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly, carefully, she blinked again, intentionally slow, testing what she had seen. Her reflection remained perfectly still, unyielding, its eyes locked onto hers with a strange, unsettling stillness. A laugh escaped her lips, nervous. "Thin, get a grip, Sarah," she whispered to herself, shaking her head as though to scatter the creeping dread. She turned away, trying to dismiss the chill crawling up her spine, but something compelled her to look back. The reflection smiled, not the familiar echo of her own expressions, but an entirely separate gesture, slow, sly, and undeniably wrong. The smile was sharp, full of knowing malice. Sarah's stomach turned cold as she stared, unable to look away. Her reflection raised a hand and pressed it flat against the glass. Fingers splayed in a silent beckoning. Sarah's breath came fast and shallow now. "This isn't real," she whispered, as though saying the words aloud could make them true. She inched closer, her feet moving against her will, until her trembling fingers hovered just above the mirror's surface. Tentatively, she pressed her hand to the glass. It was cold, solid, normal. Yet her reflection's palms seemed to push back with a force that was anything but. A jolt of terror surged through her, and she stumbled back into the hallway, her mind racing. Hallucination, stress, a cruel prank. She grabbed her phone from the counter and switched on the camera, her fingers fumbling as she tried to steady her shaking hands. If this was happening, if it was real, she needed proof. Returning to the bathroom with her phone aimed squarely at the mirror, Sarah mustered as much confidence as she could and spoke, her voice tight but defiant. "Blink if you're real." The reflection winked. One eye closed and opened with deliberate slowness, and then the sly smile widened further, as though amused by her terror. The phone nearly slipped from her hands. Her knees felt weak, her thoughts a swirling mess of fear and disbelief. She replayed the video, praying it had been her imagination. But there it was, the reflection moving independently, mocking her from beyond the glass. Desperate for answers, Sarah turned to the internet, her shaking fingers typing out search after search. Theories flooded her screen. Parallel universes, spiritual hauntings, psychological disturbances. None fit perfectly, but the sheer number of others claiming similar experiences offered her cold comfort. She wasn't alone, and yet no explanation brought her peace. As the hours slipped by, she realized she couldn't stay in her apartment that night. The mirrors, the glossy tiles, even the darkened windows felt like portals, hiding something that watched and waited. She packed a small bag, booked a room at a nearby hotel, and left without daring to glance at her reflection in the lobby's polished surfaces. In the unfamiliar safety of the hotel room, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her logical mind scrambled for explanations, but deep down, a more primal part of her soul whispered that she had seen something unnatural, something that could not be undone. Morning light softened the terror slightly, as though daylight itself banished the darkness that had crept into her world. Returning home felt like stepping back into a battlefield. Determined to find answers, she reached out to paranormal investigators, psychologists, and even a physicist willing to entertain ideas of dimensional breaches. Her search led her down a rabbit hole of science and the supernatural, where fact and fiction blurred in strange and disorienting ways. The more she uncovered, the less she understood, and yet understanding began to feel secondary to survival. Weeks passed and Sarah adapted to a new normal. She covered every mirror in her apartment, avoided reflective surfaces, and used her phone's camera sparingly. Her life felt smaller, more contained, but safe. Still, she could not forget that night, the smile, the wink, the hand pressing against the glass. Occasionally, she dared to peek into a small handheld mirror for brief moments, and her reflection always behaved. But the memory of that first unbidden blink haunted her, a constant reminder that the world was not as solid or simple as she had once believed. Some mysteries, she realized, are not meant to be solved. They linger like shadows at the edge of sight, reminders of the fragile veil between what we know and what we refuse to see. For Sarah, peace came not from answers but from acceptance. She learned to live cautiously, aware of the thin boundary between her world and whatever lay beyond the glass. In those quiet moments before sleep, she sometimes imagined the other her, waiting patiently in the mirror, smiling that sly, knowing smile. And in those moments, Sarah whispered to herself, a quiet truth: some doors are better left unopened, and some reflections are better left unseen. The midnight caller. The first whisper came on a night wrapped in the deep quiet of our sleepy suburb. It was just past midnight when my phone vibrated softly on the nightstand, the sound startling me awake. The glow of the screen bathed the room in an eerie blue light as I reached for it, my fingers hesitating slightly before sliding across the glass. Unknown caller, the screen read in sharp, stark letters. My curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. A hushed voice crackled through the static, neither distinctly male nor female. "Watch the windows," it breathed, low and deliberate. Before I could respond, the line went dead, swallowed by an abrupt, hollow click that seemed to echo in the stillness of my room. I lay there for a moment, my heart thudding hard against my ribs, trying to convince myself it was a prank. Morning would bring clarity, I thought, as it always did. But when I checked my phone after waking, there was no record of the call, no missed calls, no incoming calls, nothing. It was as if the midnight interruption had been nothing more than a figment of a half-waking dream. Still unsettled, I brushed it off and went about my day, convincing myself it was simply my tired mind playing tricks on me. The next night, however, the phone rang again. Once more, the screen flashed unknown caller, and once more I answered. The same hushed voice whispered into my ear, this time with a palpable urgency, "Lock your doors." Then silence, followed by the familiar hollow click. The message hung in my mind like a heavy weight, more ominous now in its repetition. Yet when morning came, my call log remained spotless, as though nothing had happened. This pattern continued for several nights. Each call came precisely at midnight, each warning more insistent than the last. "Don't look outside. Do not open the door. They're watching." By now, unease had burrowed deep into my chest, settling there like a stone. I shared the strange events with friends and family. Their reactions varied. Some were concerned, others skeptical. Most suggested it was a cruel prank, or a glitch in my phone. But deep down, I knew there was something more, something beyond prank calls and technological errors. Desperate for answers, I set up a camera on my nightstand to record overnight. At the very least, I wanted proof that the calls were real, that I wasn't losing my grip on reality. On the 7th night, I lay in bed, my eyes fixed on the soft glow of the digital clock as it neared midnight. When the phone vibrated, my body tensed. I picked it up and answered, my voice unsteady. This time, the whisper came softer, almost mournful. "Look behind you." Every hair on my body stood on end. My breath caught as I turned, scanning the room with wide eyes. Shadows stretched across the walls, but there was nothing, no movement, no sound, only the pounding of my heart. The camera captured it all. The phone ringing, my panicked reaction, the silence that followed. The next morning, I replayed the footage over and over, staring at the undeniable evidence of a call that left no trace on my device. I took the recording to the police. The officer on duty listened. Quietly, his brows knitting as he watched the video. He offered to trace the number, but warned me it could be impossible if the caller used burner phones or sophisticated spoofing techniques. Days passed without word from the police, but the calls continued. The warnings grew stranger. "Don't trust the lights. They know you're awake." My sleep became restless, my mind frayed from the weight of constant dread. One night, fueled by fear and defiance, I decided to confront whoever was behind the calls. When the phone rang at midnight, I answered with a steady voice, masking my terror. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" There was a pause, the static on the line crackling faintly. Then the voice returned, softer now, almost regretful. "You're in danger. They're coming for you." My chest tightened. "Who's coming for me?" I demanded, but the line went dead once more, leaving only silence in its wake. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in the dim glow of the hallway light, clutching the baseball bat I kept beside my bed. Hours passed in suffocating stillness until the sound of shattering glass downstairs jolted me to my feet. My pulse roared in my ears as I crept toward the staircase, gripping the bat tightly. The chill of the night air spilled into the house through a broken window. In the moonlight stood a masked figure, frozen for a heartbeat before darting toward the door. Adrenaline surged through me. With a desperate cry, I swung the bat, but the intruder slipped into the shadows and vanished. The police arrived minutes later, their blue lights casting flickering patterns on the walls. I told them everything, the calls, the warnings, the masked figure, and for the first time, they believed me. Their investigation revealed I had been targeted by a criminal gang involved in home invasions. The mysterious caller, it turned out, was a former member riddled with guilt, risking exposure to warn those marked for attack. Though the calls stopped after that night, I never forgot the voice that whispered warnings in the darkness. It had saved my life. And even now, long after the danger has passed, I still glance at the clock as midnight approaches, listening for the faint vibration of a phone that might never ring again. The sleepwalker in the garage. The string of break-ins in my quiet neighborhood had started about a month ago. Every few nights, someone would slip through the darkness, targeting garages and sheds, disappearing as swiftly as they came. The police increased their patrols, but whoever was behind the thefts was clever, careful enough to leave nothing behind except a few faint scuffs and an unnerving sense of violation. My garage had already been hit twice. The first time, they'd taken an old box of vinyl records and some tools. The second time, my bicycle vanished from its hook on the wall. The thought of a stranger moving unseen through my property left me restless at night, haunted by the possibility of another intrusion, driven by equal parts frustration and fear. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I purchased a high-end security camera with motion detection and night vision, installing it in the corner of the garage where it had a perfect view of the side door. I hoped it would at least catch a glimpse of the thief, a blurry face, a license plate, anything that could end this unease. The first few nights brought nothing of interest. The camera captured little more than swaying branches and the occasional darting raccoon, its glowing eyes eerily bright in the infrared light. Then, one morning, I noticed the cameras indicate a light flashing. There had been activity during the night. My pulse quickened as I opened the footage, eager for the first clue. But as the video began to play, an icy chill slid down my spine. At exactly 3:08 a.m., the garage door creaked open from the inside. I watched in disbelief as I stepped into frame, moving slowly, deliberately, my face pale and expressionless. My eyes were open, but vacant, as though I were staring through the walls into some distant void. I was sleepwalking. My hands brushed along the garage shelves with a strange tenderness, as though searching for something. Then, in the dim glow of the camera's night vision, my face turned toward the lens. I froze. My own eyes seemed to lock with mine through the screen, unseeing and yet so unsettlingly present. Without warning, my lips began to move. I couldn't hear the words, my camera had no audio, but I could see my mouth forming sentences, whispering to someone or something just outside the frame. My stomach churned as I watched my unconscious self nodding, gesturing faintly, before turning and shuffling back into the house, leaving the garage door wide open. When I woke later that morning, I had no memory of the event, but the lingering unease of watching myself on that screen stayed with me all day. Determined to uncover what was happening, I installed a second camera in the garage, positioned to capture a broader angle, and placed an audio recorder nearby to catch anything my lips might whisper in the darkness. The next night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, dreading the thought of what I might do without knowing. When morning came, I reviewed the footage with trembling hands. Just as before, at 3 a.m., I appeared on camera. Again, I shuffled into the garage, eyes glassy and movement stiff. From the new angle, I could see that I wasn't alone, not visibly. Yet, I was clearly interacting with someone or something, just beyond the camera's view. I paused mid-step, nodding as though in response to an unseen question. Then I raised a hand as if to touch something in front of me. I hit play on the audio recording, my breath held tight in my chest. The sound of my own voice drifted through the speakers, soft and steady. It's safe now. They're all asleep. Don't worry. The words sent a jolt of fear through me, as if I were listening to someone else entirely, an echo of a stranger hidden within my own body. Who was I talking to? Desperate for answers, I sought out a sleep specialist. After a series of tests and consultations, they diagnosed me with a rare form of stress-induced parasomnia, a condition where subconscious fears and anxieties can manifest in complex behaviors during sleep. To prevent further episodes, they recommended installing alarms on doors and windows to alert me if I tried to leave the house. I followed their advice and held my breath for nights on end, praying it would stop, and finally the alarms worked. The sleepwalking ceased. But even as peace settled back over the neighborhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking on the edges of my consciousness. I reviewed the footage one last time, staring at my pale, vacant face, whispering those strange words to the empty air. Part of me wanted to believe it was nothing more than my stressed mind unraveling in the night. But another part, a deeper, quieter part, couldn't he let go of the nagging thought, what if it wasn't just me in that garage? The break-ins eventually stopped, but the sense of mystery never truly faded. To this day, I leave the cameras running, scanning the dim glow of the garage each morning, not for thieves anymore, but for the ghost of my sleepwalking self and the unseen presence it seemed so eager to comfort in. The small, silent hours before dawn, the breathing beneath the bed. Elliot had long believed that the fears of childhood faded with time, dissolving into the rational light of adulthood. But standing in the doorway of his daughter Lucy's bedroom, he realized that some fears never truly leave us. They merely sleep in the corners of memory, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Lucy had come to him moments earlier, clutching her teddy bear with small, trembling hands. Her wide, frightened eyes reminded him all too vividly of himself at her age. "Daddy, there's something breathing under my bed," she whispered, her voice quivering as though the very words might summon what she feared. For a brief instant, Elliot was transported back to his own childhood bedroom, where countless nights had been spent listening to that same sound, the slow, steady rise and fall of breathing from beneath his bed. Back then, he had convinced himself it was nothing, a child's overactive imagination. Yet the memory sent a chill crawling down his spine. Still, he smiled reassuringly at Lucy, hiding the unease gnawing at his gut. "Let's go check together," he said softly, determined not to let his fear show. Her small fingers curled tightly around his. As they crossed the room, each step seeming to thicken the air with an almost electric tension. Kneeling beside her bed, Elliot felt his pulse quicken. He forced himself to keep his movements calm as he lifted the bed skirt and peered into the shadows. His breath caught in his throat. Two gleaming eyes stared back at him from the darkness. His body reacted before his mind could, jerking backwards so fast that his head bumped the underside of the bed frame. "It's okay, Lucy," he said quickly, his voice steadier than he felt. "Stay back." Gathering what little courage he could muster, he grabbed the flashlight from her dresser and shone it beneath the bed. The light cut through the darkness to reveal a small, dusty box. The reflective glint of a metallic object on its lid explained the eyes he had seen. Relief swept through him, leaving his limbs trembling in its wake. He pulled the box out carefully and opened it, finding a collection of old photographs and childhood toys he barely remembered. The breathing sound had vanished, replaced by the soft hum of the heater kicking on. Forcing a smile, Elliot tucked Lucy back into bed, assuring her that all was safe. She fell asleep quickly, her young mind soothed by her father's confidence. But Elliot's own mind refused to settle. In the living room, he examined the box more closely, sorting through faded photos and tiny figurines from his youth. Each item seemed to whisper faint echoes of long-forgotten moments. Jenna, his wife, joined him on the couch, her eyes filled with gentle concern. "Maybe we should talk to your mom about this," she suggested softly. "There might be more to your childhood fears than you realize." The next morning, Elliot visited his mother, carrying the box like a fragile relic of a past he wasn't sure he wanted to confront. Over steaming cups of tea at her kitchen table, he laid out the contents and waited for her reaction. Her eyes softened with recognition, but a shadow passed over her expression. "Elliot," she began carefully, her voice tinged with unease. "I always thought you were just having nightmares back then, but there was something about that house, something unsettling. I could never explain." She spoke of strange occurrences from her own childhood, of unexplained noises and cold drafts in the house where Elliot now lived with his family. Her father, Elliot's grandfather, had once insisted on sealing off certain parts of the home, including the crawl space beneath Elliot's old bedroom. Her words dredged up memories Elliot had long buried, of nights spent frozen in fear, too terrified to move or call for help as he listened to soft, rhythmic breathing beneath his bed. Determined to put his childhood fears to rest and protect his daughter from sharing them, Elliot hired a team of contractors to inspect the area beneath Lucy's room. As the workers pried up the floorboards, the house seemed to hold its breath. Hidden beneath layers of wood and dust, they uncovered a bricked-up entrance to a forgotten cellar. The air that spilled out was cold and musty, carrying with it the heavy scent of age. Inside, they found only an old, dust-covered mirror leaning against the wall. Its surface was pocked and clouded, but as Elliot gazed into it, he thought he saw something move, a flicker of shadow that vanished. Before he could be sure, shaken, Elliot had the mirror removed and the cellar sealed properly. That night, for the first time in weeks, Lucy slept peacefully. The breathing noises never returned. Elliot felt a deep sense of relief, as though a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted. And yet, in the quiet moments between wakefulness and sleep, he sometimes caught himself listening for any sound out of place. The memory of those gleaming eyes and the soft, steady breath beneath his bed lingered still, a reminder of how thin the veil is between imagination and reality. The hour that disappeared. In a quiet corner of town where the nights seemed especially dark and the silence pressed heavy against the windows, I began noticing something peculiar about time itself. It started one unremarkable evening when I awoke suddenly to check the clock on my nightstand. The glowing red numbers read for 15 a.m. Confused, I remembered glancing at the same clock just moments earlier, and it had said 3:15 a.m. Somehow, an entire hour had passed in the blink of an eye. At first, I dismissed it as a groggy mistake, an illusion of my tired mind. But when it happened again the next night, and then again, a chilling suspicion began to grow within me. To be certain, I replaced my old digital clock with a new, state-of-the-art model. I even synced it to my phone, which was set to an atomic time server. Still, every night, precisely at 3:15 a.m., time would inexplicably jump to 4:15 a.m. The missing hour left no trace, no memory, no dream fragments, nothing but an unsettling emptiness. The house seemed as still and quiet as ever, and yet something felt profoundly wrong, like an unseen current flowing beneath the surface of reality. Driven by unease, I decided to set up a camera in my bedroom to record whatever might occur during the lost hour. The plan felt absurd, but if nothing else, it might confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. That night, I fell asleep with the camera's faint red light blinking in the corner of the room, its lens aimed squarely at my bed. When morning arrived, I retrieved the memory card with a sense of dread, unsure of what I would find. The footage began innocuously enough, showing me sleeping peacefully as the hours ticked by. But at precisely 3:15 a.m., I sat bolt upright in bed, my movements slow but deliberate. My eyes were open, and though they reflected the dim glow of the night light, there was no focus in them, no recognition of the world around me. I climbed out of bed and walked toward the window, where I stood utterly still. For an hour, I did not move, did not fidget, did not sway, just stood there with a faint, unsettling smile tugging at my lips, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. At exactly 4:15 a.m., I returned to bed, and lay down as if nothing had happened. A cold chill rippled through me as I watched myself on screen, an eerie sense of displacement settling over me. That night, I resolved to stay awake and experience whatever happened firsthand. Armed with coffee and determination, I positioned myself in a chair by the window, notebook in hand, ready to record my thoughts as 3:15 a.m. approached, the air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that raised the fine hairs along my arms. Despite my efforts, a strange heaviness settled over me, pulling at my eyelids like an unseen force. When I glanced at the clock again, it was for 15 a.m. My notebook lay open in my lap, its pages still blank. I hadn't written a single word. A wave of loss washed over me, as though I had been on the verge of witnessing something extraordinary only to have it slip away. Determined not to fail again, I enlisted the help of my friend Alex, who had a fascination with the paranormal. Together, we set up infrared cameras, motion sensors, and audio recorders, determined to catch whatever was happening in the lost hour. That night, we waited in silence, both of us tense as the clock ticked closer to 3:15 a.m. The moment it arrived, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. I felt a deep pull toward the window, an almost magnetic force urging me to rise and look out. But this time, I resisted, gripping the arms of my chair as Alex whispered encouragement from across the room. Then we saw it on the infrared camera's feed. A faint glow appeared outside the window. It pulsed softly, shifting in color and shape, like a living ribbon of light undulating in the air. "It's beautiful," Alex murmured, eyes wide with wonder. The cameras whirred softly as they captured the phenomenon. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards, just on the edge of hearing, its melody strangely calming. For nearly an hour, the light danced and swirled in intricate patterns, moving as though aware of our gaze. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. The clock clicked over to 4:15 a.m., and the oppressive weight in the air lifted, leaving us both staring at one another in silence. In the days that followed, we pored over the recordings. The light emitted no heat, and the sound was faint but undeniably there. No natural phenomenon matched what we had seen, and yet, despite our attempts to analyze it, the experience left us with more questions than answers. Over the next few weeks, I felt an odd sense of anticipation each night as 3:15 a.m. approached, not fear, but something akin to longing. Eventually, I stopped trying to resist or understand. Instead, I embraced the mystery each night. I waited for the missing hour with quiet acceptance, letting the glow wash over me like a lullaby. Whatever it was, spirit, energy, or some unknown facet of the universe, it seemed to want no harm, and in its presence, I found a sense of connection to something vast and unknowable, a comfort that words could never fully capture. The dinner invitation. When Michael found the dinner invitation nailed to his front door, an icy shiver ran down his spine. The cardstock was heavy and elegant, embossed with swirling golden script. That seemed out of place in the modern world. It announced a formal dinner to be held at the neighboring estate, a sprawling mansion that had been abandoned for years. What unsettled Michael most was the host's name printed at the bottom, Harold Greystone. Harold had been his reclusive neighbor until 2 years ago, when he died under mysterious circumstances. No family had come forward to claim the house, and since then it had fallen into disrepair, its once grand facade now shadowed by creeping ivy and broken windows. Yet here in his hand was an invitation from a man long dead. Michael stood frozen on his porch, staring at the card as autumn winds rustled through the trees. His first thought was that it must be some elaborate prank, but deep down he felt a pull, an almost magnetic curiosity that whispered for him to accept. Against his better judgment, he pocketed the card and resolved to investigate. The mansion sat just beyond his backyard, but it had always felt like a world apart. Surrounded by tall wrought iron gates and dense, overgrown gardens, even from a distance, it exuded an air of secrets best left undisturbed. As Saturday approached, the sense of unease in Michael's chest deepened. Friends he confided in expressed concern, their voices tinged with disbelief. "Don't go," one warned. "Even if it's a prank, nothing good waits in that house." But despite their protests, Michael felt a strange compulsion to see this through, as if some invisible thread was tugging him toward the mansion. That evening, he dressed carefully in semi-formal attire, the faint scent of cologne lingering in the air. He told himself it was to meet the occasion, but truthfully, he hoped to cloak himself in normalcy for whatever he was about to face. The setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows. As Michael approached the Greystone estate, the front gate, usually locked and rusted shut, stood ajar with an almost expectant silence. He hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open. The metal groaned softly in the still air. The front door loomed ahead, its surface worn but clean, the handle gleaming faintly in the dim light. To his surprise, it opened easily at his touch, revealing a grand foyer illuminated by warm candlelight. The house smelled faintly of aged wood and lavender, as though it had been meticulously maintained despite its outward decay. Michael's footsteps echoed softly against polished marble floors. As he entered the dining room, there, a long table awaited him, set for two with gleaming silverware and crystal glasses that refracted candlelight in dancing patterns. The scene was so normal, so perfectly arranged, that it made his skin crawl. "Michael, how wonderful to see you." The voice was deep, familiar, and undeniably human. Michael spun around to find Harold Greystone standing in the doorway. Though he looked older, his sharp features and piercing eyes were unmistakable. "But you're dead," Michael stammered, his voice barely more than a whisper. Harold smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Please, let's sit. Dinner is served, and I promise all will be explained." Through the meal, Harold spoke as if nothing was amiss. He talked of his life, his travels, his passion for history and the occult. The food was exquisite, richer and more flavorful than anything Michael had tasted before. But each bite felt heavy in his mouth, weighed down by a gnawing sense of dread. Finally, over dessert, Harold set down his fork and looked at Michael with a gravity that made the candle flames seem to dim. "You deserve to know the truth," he said. "2 years ago, I staged my own death. It was necessary to complete a task for a society that operates beyond the boundaries of what most consider real." Michael sat rigid as Harold explained how he had been part of a secretive group, delving into the fringes of science and the supernatural. His supposed death had been a way to step beyond the reach of ordinary life and fulfill his role without interruption. "And you, my boy, are part of this story too," Harold said softly. "You have qualities we need, qualities few possess. This dinner is more than an explanation, it's an invitation." The words hung between them like a spell. Michael's rational mind screamed that this was madness, but something deeper, an instinct he couldn't name, stirred within him. I need time," he murmured. Harold nodded. "Take all the time you need, but remember, we do not offer invitations twice." As Michael stepped back into the cool night air, the mansion seemed to recede into darkness behind him, its windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. For days, he wrestled with the decision. Fear and intrigue wove together in a knot that tightened with each passing hour. On the 5th night, he found himself standing once again at the open gates of the Greystone estate, the invitation card clutched tightly in his hand. Whatever lay beyond that door, madness or revelation, he knew there was no turning back. And so, with a deep breath, Michael stepped into a world few would ever glimpse, leaving his old life behind like a coat shed at the threshold of something vast and unknowable. The stranger at the window. The first time I saw him, it was just after midnight. A storm had rolled in from the west, bringing with it sheets of rain that lashed against my windows and wind that howled like a living thing. I was curled up on the couch, a cup of tea in my hands, trying to unwind after a long day. My small house, perched at the edge of a thick forest, felt even more isolated than usual under the weight of the storm. That's when I noticed him, standing at the edge of the tree line, half hidden in the shadows, watching my house. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The lightning illuminated him in brief flashes, a tall figure in dark clothes, completely still. My pulse quickened, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a hunter caught in the rain, or someone lost and looking for shelter. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. There was a stillness to him that felt unnatural, as if he weren't affected by the storm at all. I pulled the curtains shut, trying to shake the unease creeping over me. Maybe he'd move on. Maybe he wasn't even there. But when I woke up the next morning and peered outside, there were no footprints in the mud where he'd stood. Nothing to suggest anyone had been there at all. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, even in broad daylight. The second night, he was closer. This time, he stood at the edge of my yard, just beyond the faint glow of my porch light. His posture was the same, rigid, almost statuesque, but now I could see more detail. His clothes were oddly dated, like something from a different era. A white-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but I could feel his gaze all the same. I locked every door and window in the house, clutching my phone with trembling hands. The police were polite when I called, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. No footprints, no trace. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, stress, exhaustion, overwork. But when I woke in the middle of the third night to a soft tapping sound, that fragile sense of logic shattered. The sound was faint but deliberate, coming from the living room. My heart pounded as I crept out of bed and peeked around the corner. He was standing at the window, his face obscured by fog on the glass, his hand raised to tap again. Summoning every ounce of courage, I shouted at him, demanding he leave. His head tilted slightly, as if he were curious, but he didn't move. Instead, he pressed his palm flat against the window pane and then lowered it slowly, leaving behind a smudge in the shape of a handprint. I blinked, and he was gone, vanished into the storm like smoke. The police didn't believe me when they saw no signs of forced entry or footprints around the house. Probably a dream, they said. But I knew better. Each night after, the tapping returned, and each night he came closer. On the fifth night, I woke to find him standing just inside the house. My bedroom door creaked as it swung open, and there he was, a towering silhouette in the doorway. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply stood there, watching me with a stillness that felt heavier than words. I shut my eyes tight and prayed for it to be a dream. When I opened them again, the doorway was empty. The next morning, however, I found muddy footprints leading from the front door to my bedroom. Desperate, I packed a bag and fled to a hotel in the city. That first night away, I slept soundly for the first time in a week. No tapping, no stranger, no dreams. But when I checked out and returned home a few days later, I found something waiting for me. On the window pane of the living room, traced in condensation, were 5 words, "Thanks for letting me in." The thing in the cornfield. The old farmhouse had been in my family for generations, standing proud among acres of corn that stretched endlessly in every direction. I had spent every summer there, as a child, running between the rows, playing hide and seek until the fireflies emerged and my grandmother called me in for supper. But as I grew older, those carefree summers were replaced by responsibilities, and I rarely returned. It wasn't until my grandmother passed that I found myself back in that house, standing in the quiet kitchen as memories echoed through the walls. The fields were just as I remembered, tall, golden stalks swaying gently in the wind, their dry rustle whispering secrets I couldn't quite make out. The first night, I sat on the porch watching the horizon burn orange with sunset, and for a moment I felt at peace. But when darkness fell and the wind stilled, the silence of the farm felt oppressive, almost alive. It was then that I heard it, a faint rustling in the corn, to deliberate to be the wind. At first, I dismissed it as wildlife. Deer often wandered through the crops, and raccoons scavenged at night. But as the hours passed, the sound grew louder, moving closer to the house. When I stepped off the porch and shone my flashlight toward the field, the beam of light caught nothing but endless rows of corn. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a prickling sensation crawling up the back of my neck. The next morning, I found footprints in the soft dirt at the edge of the field. They weren't mine. They were too large to deep and oddly shaped, elongated, with only 3 toes pressing into the earth. A chill settled over me as I followed them for a few yards, before they disappeared into the dense stalks. Something was out there, something that didn't belong. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I set up an old trail camera I found in the barn. I placed it on a fence post facing the corn, hoping to catch whatever was wandering near the house. That night, I tried to sleep, but the sounds from the field kept pulling me to the window. The rustling was back, heavier now, almost as if something massive was moving through the rows. I could swear I heard breathing, slow, deep, and wet. In the morning, I checked the camera footage with shaking hands. At first, there was nothing but stillness. Then, just past midnight, the stalks began to sway violently. A dark shape emerged from the corn, too large and oddly bent to be human. The creature never fully stepped into view. Instead, it crouched at the edge of the field, its glowing eyes fixed on the house, watching. And then, in a blur of movement, it darted back into the corn, faster than anything that size had a right to be. My first instinct was to leave, pack my bags, lock the house, and never look back. But something in me refused to run. Not yet. I needed answers. That evening, armed with a flashlight and the old rifle my grandfather kept above the mantel, I stepped into the cornfield. The rows towered over me, forming claustrophobic walls of dry stalks that creaked and whispered with every step. The deeper I went, the more the air seemed to change. It was thicker here, heavy with the smell of earth and something sour, almost metallic. Then I saw it, a small clearing where the stalks had been crushed flat in a wide circle. At the center lay bones, piles of them, bleached white and broken. My breath caught as I realized some were animal, but others looked unmistakably human. That's when I heard it, a low growl, so deep it seemed to vibrate the ground beneath me. The rows of corn shifted violently to my right, and before I could react, a massive, twisted shape lunged into the clearing. Its skin was pale and slick, stretched taut over a body that was both skeletal and impossibly muscular. Glowing yellow eyes locked onto mine as its lips curled back to reveal rows of jagged teeth. I didn't wait to see more. Somehow, I forced my legs to move, tearing through the corn as the creature crashed after me. The sound of stalks snapping and its ragged breathing filled the night air as I burst out of the field and stumbled onto the porch. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror just once and saw it standing at the edge of the corn. Watching me leave, its eyes glowed like embers in the darkness, and I swore I could see the faintest curl of a smile on its monstrous face. The man in the attic. When I inherited my great-uncle's house, I expected the usual burdens of dealing with an old property, leaky pipes, creaking floors, maybe a lingering smell of dust, and mothballs. What I didn't expect was the faint sound of footsteps above my head during my first night there. The house was quiet otherwise, the kind of quiet that feels almost to complete, and at first I dismissed it as the old beams settling. But the footsteps came again, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth in the attic. The next morning, I tried to put it out of my mind as I explored the house in daylight. The place had a certain charm, ornate wooden banisters, stained glass windows casting fractured rainbows across the walls, and antique furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But every time I passed beneath the attic hatch in the hallway ceiling, a chill swept over me. It was as though something above was waiting, listening, patient and still. By the third night, the footsteps became louder. Sometimes they were joined by faint scraping sounds, like fingernails dragging across wood. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding in the darkness. Rationality whispered that animals had gotten in, a raccoon, perhaps, or a squirrel nesting among the insulation. But a deeper, older part of me whispered something else, something I wasn't ready to face. Determined to silence my fears, I borrowed a ladder from the shed and climbed up to the attic the next morning. The air grew colder the higher I went, and the faint scent of mildew and old cedar filled my nose as I pushed the hatch open. Dust swirled in the dim light filtering through a single cracked window. At first glance, the attic was empty save for old trunks and stacks of yellowed newspapers. I tapped on the floorboards, testing for signs of life, but there was no sound, no scurrying, no flurry of wings. It seemed abandoned. Yet just as I was about to retreat, something caught my eye, a faint mark on the wall near the floor where the dust had been disturbed. I crouched down to inspect it and felt a wave of cold air brush against my cheek. The boards here seemed slightly loose, as though they had been pried up and replaced. Hesitant but compelled, I worked one loose and peered into the dark space beneath. What I saw made my breath hitch. There, in the narrow crawl space, were a pile of rags and a small collection of objects, coins. buttons and a tarnished silver spoon. But what chilled me most was the faint indentation in the dust, shaped like a human body curling into itself as though trying to stay unseen. A single long, dark hair lay across the boards. I backed away slowly, my mind scrambling for explanations. That night, the footsteps returned louder than ever. They no longer stayed confined to the attic, but moved down the hallway above my room. I pressed my ear to the door, and the sound stopped abruptly, as though whoever was there knew I was listening. I debated leaving the house, but something rooted me in place, a strange blend of fear and fascination keeping me tethered. By the fifth night, sleep became impossible. Around midnight, I heard a faint thud as if the attic hatch had been opened. I held my breath, clutching the heavy flashlight I kept by my bed. Slowly, the sound of soft, deliberate footsteps descended the hallway stairs. They moved slowly, almost thoughtfully, pausing just outside my bedroom door. A shadow passed beneath the gap, blotting out the faint glow of the hall light. I whispered a desperate prayer and forced myself to turn the handle, swinging the door open wide. The hallway was empty. The air smelled faintly of mildew, and the hatch to the attic now hung open, swaying gently. I stood frozen for a long moment before slamming the door shut and pushing a dresser against it. The footsteps didn't return that night, but the sense of being watched never left. The next morning, I packed my bags and left the house, locking the door behind me for the last time. As I drove away, I glanced in the rear-view mirror and saw the attic window. A pale face was pressed to the glass, watching me go, its features twisted into a smile that didn't belong to anyone I knew. The elevator game, it started as a joke, a late-night dare among friends looking for a thrill. We'd been scrolling through strange online forums when someone mentioned the elevator game. An urban legend said to transport players to another dimension. The instructions were simple. Enter a building with at least 10 floors, ride the elevator alone, and press a precise sequence of buttons. If done correctly, the doors would open not to the expected floor, but to an eerie alternate world. We laughed it off at first, but as the night grew later and the streets grew quieter, the idea seemed less ridiculous and more tempting. The old office building downtown was perfect for it. Abandoned for years, it loomed over the street like a dark sentinel, its windows reflecting nothing but the pale glow of the moon. We squeezed through a broken side door and found the elevator surprisingly functional, its dim lights flickering weakly as though reluctant to wake. I went first. I wasn't about to be called a coward. My friends stayed behind on the ground floor, their laughter echoing faintly as I stepped in and pressed the first button. The ride began like any other, smooth and quiet, the faint hum of machinery filling the silence. But as I pressed the sequence, I felt a shift in the air, subtle at first. The hum deepened, vibrating faintly through the metal walls, and the fluorescent light overhead flickered more violently. By the time I pressed the last button, my palms had grown slick with sweat. Though I told myself it was just nerves, the elevator shuddered slightly before coming to a halt. On the 5th floor, the doors slid open with a soft chime. At first glance, everything looked normal. A plain, dimly lit hallway stretched ahead, lined with peeling wallpaper and cracked tiles. But the air smelled different, thick and metallic, tinged with something sour like old blood. I leaned forward cautiously. "Hello," I called out, my voice oddly muted, as if the walls absorbed sound rather than reflected it. There was no reply, no echo, only the faint buzzing of the elevator light behind me. The rules of the game said not to step out, but curiosity gnawed at me. I took one tentative step forward, then another. The floor felt strange beneath my shoes, softer than tile, almost spongy. A chill spread through my chest as I realized I could no longer hear the hum of the elevator. When I turned back, my stomach dropped. The elevator doors were gone. In their place was a blank, windowless wall stretching endlessly in both directions. Panic clawed at my throat as I ran down the hallway, searching for any sign of a door, a staircase, anything that would lead me back. But the corridor twisted in impossible ways, looping back on itself so that no matter how far I ran, I ended up where I began. The buzzing grew louder, now accompanied by a low, rhythmic thumping like a distant heartbeat. Shadows began to shift along the walls, stretching into elongated shapes that didn't match mine. Then I saw her, a woman standing at the end of the hallway, her long hair draped over her face. Her clothes were tattered and soaked with something dark and wet. I froze, remembering the warning I'd read. Do not speak to her, do not look at her, do not acknowledge her presence. But as I turned away, a soft, wet whisper echoed down the corridor. Why did you come here? Against my better judgment, I glanced back. Her face was pale, her eyes black and empty like twin voids. She was closer now, though I hadn't heard her move. You shouldn't be here, she whispered again, her voice layered with something inhuman, like two voices speaking at once. My legs finally obeyed, propelling me forward in a blind sprint. The walls pulsed and quivered around me, the hallway shrinking and stretching in dizzying waves. Just as I felt her cold breath on the back of my neck, I slammed into a metal door. Without thinking, I threw it open and stumbled into the elevator car. The door slid shut behind me with a harsh clang, and the familiar hum returned. I pounded the ground floor button over and over, barely daring to breathe. When the doors opened again, my friends were waiting on the other side, their laughter fading as they saw my pale, shaking hands. I never told them what happened. I never spoke of the woman in the hallway or the pulsing shadows that seemed to reach for me. But even now, years later, I avoid elevators whenever I can, because sometimes, late at night, I still hear the wet whisper in my dreams. You shouldn't have come here. The face in the woods. I grew up in a small rural town surrounded by thick forests, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and kids rode bikes, until the street lights flickered on. But there was one stretch of woods everyone avoided. The locals called it Whispering Hollow, a place that seemed unnaturally still, where even birdsong fell silent. My grandfather used to warn me, don't go into those woods at night. There's something in there that watches. As a child, I thought it was just one of his scary stories meant to keep me close to home. Years later, when I was home from college on break, curiosity got the better of me. My childhood friend Jake and I were out late, and after a few drinks, the idea of exploring Whispering Hollow seemed thrilling. Come on, Jake laughed, waving his flashlight. Let's prove your granddad wrong. Against my better judgment, I followed him to the edge of the woods. The air seemed colder there, and the scent of damp earth was heavy, almost cloying. The first few steps into the forest felt harmless enough. Our flashlights cut narrow beams through the dense undergrowth, and we joked to keep our nerves at bay. But soon the path disappeared, swallowed by thick brambles and gnarled roots. The trees loomed unnaturally close, their twisted branches creaking softly in the breeze. It felt like the woods were leaning into. Listen! That's when we heard it. A faint whisper, like someone speaking just out of earshot. We froze, exchanging uneasy glances. Did you hear that? Jake asked in a low voice. Before I could reply, the whisper came again, closer this time, and clearer. Go back. My mouth went dry as I swept my flashlight through the darkness. Nothing but trees stared back at me, but the air felt charged, heavy with unseen eyes. Let's turn around, I whispered. But Jake shook his head. Probably just the wind. He pushed ahead, and I reluctantly followed. Then we saw it, half hidden between two trees, a pale face peering out at us. It was impossibly white, almost glowing in the darkness, with deep-set eyes that didn't blink. For a moment, I thought it might be a mask or some trick of the light, but then it moved, slowly retreating into the shadows. Panic surged through me. We're leaving, I said firmly, grabbing Jake's arm, but he seemed transfixed, staring after the face. Did you see that? It looked human. Before he could step closer, the whisper returned, sharper this time. Leave now. The temperature plummeted, and my breath puffed in small white clouds. My instincts screamed at me to run. We stumbled back the way we'd come. But the forest seemed to twist around us, the path unfamiliar, and the trees closing in tighter. Every so often, I caught a glimpse of that pale face in the corner of my eye, always watching, always just beyond the reach of our lights. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in strange, guttural tones until they became a chorus. Finally, we broke through the tree line, gasping as we tumbled onto the dirt road. The air felt lighter. Here, the oppressive weight of the forest lifting slightly. We didn't speak on the walk home, too shaken to put words to what we'd seen. When we reached my house, Jake muttered a quick goodbye and hurried away, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly in the darkness. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I kept thinking about that face. Pale, still, and impossibly calm in the morning, I noticed something strange. On my window, drawn in the condensation, was a single word: return. I wiped it away with trembling hands, telling myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. To this day, I haven't gone back to Whispering Hollow. But sometimes, when the wind rustles through the trees outside my bedroom window, I hear faint whispers urging me to return. And sometimes, just before I drift off to sleep, I see that face in the darkness, watching and waiting for me to step into the woods again. The static on the baby monitor. When my wife and I brought our newborn daughter home, we thought the sleepless nights would be the hardest part. We were wrong. It began on a Wednesday, 2 weeks after her birth, when we first heard the static on the baby monitor. At first, we thought nothing of it. Static was normal, we told ourselves. But this static was different, softer somehow, almost like faint whispers hidden within the white noise. The nursery sat at the end of the hall, a cozy room painted in soft yellows, and filled with plush animals and tiny clothes neatly folded in drawers. We kept the monitor on, our nightstand, the speaker quietly humming as we drifted in and out of shallow sleep. That night, though, I woke to the sound of soft murmuring. At first, I thought my wife was talking in her sleep, but when I turned toward her, she was fast asleep, her breathing slow and even. I sat up and listened closely. The monitor crackled faintly, then a man's voice, cut through the static. "Hush now, don't cry." My heart froze in my chest. The words were gentle, almost soothing, but there was no mistaking their presence. I glanced at my wife to see if she'd heard, but she didn't stir. Gathering my courage, I tiptoed down the hallway and eased open the nursery door. The room was silent except for the faint whir of the ceiling fan. My daughter lay peacefully in her crib, her tiny hands curled into fists. No one was there. The window was locked, the closet door ajar but empty. I checked every corner of the room, trying to shake the lingering unease clinging to my skin. Maybe I had imagined it. I told myself sleep deprivation could do strange things. The next night, the whispers returned. This time, my wife heard them too. We sat in bed, staring at the monitor as a soft, crooning voice spoke through the static. Such a sweet little thing. Don't be afraid. My wife clutched my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Someone's in the house, she whispered. But when I searched the nursery, the house, even the yard outside, I found nothing. I bought a new monitor the following day, convinced the old one had picked up a neighbor's frequency. But the whispers continued, now growing clearer. "She's perfect, just perfect." The voice was deeper this time, tinged with something I couldn't place, longing, maybe, or hunger. My wife insisted we call the police. They searched every inch of the property and found no signs of forced entry. "It's probably interference," the officer said, though his uneasy glance at the monitor told me he wasn't fully convinced. That night, the voice spoke again, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was louder, clearer, as though the man stood right beside the crib. "I'm so glad she's here. I've been waiting so long." My wife and I rushed into the nursery, hearts pounding. But again, the room was empty. Our daughter slept soundly, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. We decided to sleep in the nursery the next night, taking turns keeping watch. Around 3 a.m., I heard the sound of soft humming. My wife was asleep in the rocking chair, but the humming wasn't coming from her. Slowly, I turned toward the crib. Standing over it was the faint outline of a man, his form flickering like static on a television screen. His face was blurred, shifting, but his hands reached toward my daughter with an almost tender slowness. I leapt forward, shouting, and the figure dissolved into the air like smoke. My wife woke with a scream as I scooped our daughter into my arms. That was the last night we spent in that house. We moved in with my parents the next day, and the whispers on the monitor stopped. But sometimes, late at night, I turn the monitor on just to check, and in the quiet hiss of static, I swear I can still hear him whispering, "She's perfect. Just perfect." The knock at the door. It was just after 2 a.m. when the knocking began. I had been sitting in the living room, the soft glow of a lamp illuminating the pages of a book I wasn't really reading. The world outside was silent, wrapped in a heavy darkness that seemed thicker than usual. The sound came again, 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the front door. At first, I thought I had imagined it. Who would be knocking at this hour? I waited, holding my breath, but the knocks didn't come again. Just as I was about to dismiss it and return to my book, there was another sound, softer this time, like fingers dragging down the wooden panels of the door. A chill prickled along my arms. I set the book aside and stood, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor as I crept toward the front hallway. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but the shadowy outline of my porch and the dim glow of the street light across the road. The night seemed unusually still, the air heavy with an unspoken tension. I hesitated, my hand resting on the door handle, but something deep in my gut told me not to open it. Instead, I whispered into the dark, "Who's there?" No answer. Silence pressed in around me like a living thing. Then, so faint I almost didn't hear it, came a voice, soft and childlike, muffled through the door. "Please, let me in." My breath caught in my throat. It sounded like a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, but something about the tone felt wrong, too calm, too rehearsed. I stepped back from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The knocking returned, louder this time, more insistent. "Please, it's so cold out here." The voice was still soft, still eerily composed. I backed away further, my mind scrambling for explanations. A lost child, a cruel prank, or something else entirely? I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, explaining the situation in a hushed voice. The operator assured me a patrol car was on its way. "Don't open the door," she warned. "Stay on the line." But before I could respond, the voice spoke again, sharper this time. "Let me in. I know you're there." The dual knob rattled gently, as though tiny fingers were testing its strength. My pulse roared in my ears as I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the phone like a lifeline. The operator's voice murmured reassurances, but they felt distant, muffled by the sound of my own rapid breathing. Minutes crawled by like hours until the red and blue lights of the patrol car swept across my front windows. The knocking stopped instantly. When the officers arrived, they found nothing, no child, no footprints in the frost-covered porch, no sign that anyone had been there at all. "Probably some kids messing around," one officer said, though the tightness in his jaw suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. The police stayed for a while, walking the property and assuring me it was safe. When they left, I checked the door one last time. There, just above the dual knob, were 5 small indentations, tiny fingerprints pressed deep into the wood. That night, I barricaded the door with a chair and tried to sleep, but every creak of the house set my nerves on edge. Just as I began to drift off, I thought I heard it again, 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoing faintly from somewhere deep in the house. The thing in the mirror. It began with small things, the subtle unease of catching my reflection moving a fraction of a second too late, or the way my mirrored self seemed to hold my gaze a little too long. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Everyone experiences that odd moment where the brain plays tricks with perception, right? But deep down, I felt it wasn't a trick. Something in the mirror was wrong. The first real incident happened on a quiet Thursday evening. I had just finished brushing my teeth, my mind lost in the dull rhythm of the day. When I looked up, my reflection didn't move. For a long, breathless moment, it stared back at me with a fixed, unnatural smile. My hands gripped the sink so tightly my knuckles whitened, and then, as though nothing had happened, it copied me, smile gone, eyes dull again. I backed out of the bathroom, my pulse hammering in my ears. Maybe it was exhaustion, I reasoned, or maybe stress. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the memory of those eyes, so familiar yet so cold. I avoided mirrors the next day, dressing in the dim light of my bedroom, brushing my teeth with my gaze fixed firmly on the counter. But mirrors are hard to avoid. They're everywhere, in bathroom stalls, store windows, elevator doors. Each time I caught my reflection, I felt watched, as though a separate consciousness peered back at me from the glass. Then came the night I woke to faint tapping. At first, I thought it was coming from my window, but no, it was from the bathroom mirror. The sound was soft but deliberate, a slow and steady tap. Tap, tap. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept down the hallway and peeked inside. The bathroom was dark, the air unusually cold. In the faint moonlight streaming through the window, I saw it, my reflection standing there, grinning, even though I was frozen in the doorway. Its hand was raised, tapping softly on the glass. I stumbled backward, slamming the door shut. My reflection didn't belong to me anymore. It had become something else, something separate, something alive. That night, I covered every mirror in the house with sheets and towels, trying to block out whatever was on the other side. But the tapping didn't stop. It grew louder, more urgent, echoing faintly through the walls as though the sound could seep through the glass itself. The next evening, I found words scrawled on the steamed-up mirror in the bathroom. Let me out. My stomach dropped. The handwriting was mine, but I hadn't touched the glass. I tried scrubbing it away, but the words reappeared, clearer this time. You don't belong here. I do. I slept on the couch that night, but dreams of mirrors surrounded me. In them, I stood in a room made entirely of glass, hundreds of reflections staring back, each one smiling, none of them blinking. When I woke, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as though I'd left a part of myself trapped in that dream. By the end of the week, the tapping had stopped, but the silence felt worse. I uncovered the bathroom mirror just once to check, and my reflection smiled at me. Not a twitch of malice, not a hint of life, just an empty, soulless grin. I covered it again and haven't uncovered it since. Now I avoid all mirrors. I use my phone's camera when I need to see my face, but sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I catch movement where there shouldn't be any, and every so often, I hear faint tapping coming from the glass surfaces I can't completely avoid, soft, steady, patient. The radio in the basement. When I moved into my new house, the realtor had mentioned the basement was unfinished, as though it were an afterthought. But I liked the idea of extra storage space, and on my first weekend there, I ventured down the creaky wooden steps to take a look. The air was cool and musty, with that familiar scent of damp stone and old wood. It was quiet, too quiet, in fact, except for a faint sound I couldn't place. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. A soft crackle like static. I followed the sound to a corner of the basement, where a dusty old radio sat on a crooked wooden shelf. Its dial glowed faintly, though the power cord trailed uselessly across the floor, unplugged. I frowned and reached for the dial, but before I could touch it, a voice crackled through the static. "Don't go upstairs." My hand froze. The voice was low, male, and tinged with urgency. I pulled my hand back slowly and glanced toward the steps leading up to the kitchen. Had I heard correctly? Or was this some kind of prank? I leaned in closer to the radio, my heart hammering in my chest. Hello? I whispered. For a long moment, there was only static. Then the voice returned, softer this time, almost pleading. "They're waiting for you. Don't open the door." I stumbled back, my legs shaky. The house was supposed to be empty. I'd lived here alone for 3 days, and no one had a spare key. Gathering my courage, I crept up the basement steps and pressed my ear to the kitchen door. Silence. Slowly, I turned the handle and peeked through the crack. The kitchen looked as I had left it, except for one thing. The front door was open, the cool night air flowing in. A figure stood in the doorway, a tall, gaunt silhouette with its back to me. I couldn't see its face, but something about its posture felt wrong. Wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Then, as if sensing my gaze, it began to turn, slowly, deliberately. Before I could see its face, I slammed the kitchen door shut and bolted it. My heart raced as I backed down the steps, nearly tripping in my haste. In the basement, the radio crackled again. Good. Stay down there. The voice was calmer now, almost soothing. What's going on? I asked, my voice trembling. The static deepened for a moment before the voice replied, they aren't what they seem. Stay quiet. Stay hidden. I sat there for hours, listening to the faint hum of the radio and the creaks above me as the figure moved through the house. At one point, it tried the basement door. The knob rattled softly, and a voice, not the one from the radio, but something colder, emptier, spoke from the other side. We know you're down there. By dawn, the sound stopped. When I finally crept upstairs, the front door was closed again. There was no sign of the figure, no footprints on the dusty floorboards. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in the house with me. The radio remains in the basement, and I've left it exactly as I found it. Sometimes, late at night, I hear it crackling faintly through the floorboards, whispering words I can't quite make out. I haven't gone back down to listen, and I don't plan to. The thing at the end of the hall. The hallway in my apartment seemed ordinary enough during the day. Just a narrow stretch of beige carpet leading to a row of identical doors. But at night, it felt different. The shadows seemed to deepen, the air felt heavier, and I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Moving to a new city was stressful enough without adding ghost stories into the mix. But the feeling didn't go away. It started with sounds, faint shuffling noises at the far end of the hall, as though someone was dragging their feet just out of sight. One night, I stood at my peephole for over an hour, watching. The hall was empty. No doors opened, no lights flickered on, but the sound continued, slow and deliberate. A few nights later, I woke to a soft knock on my door, 3 gentle taps that seemed almost polite. I sat up in bed, heart racing. The clock read 3:03 a.m. I waited, holding my breath, but the knock didn't come again. In the morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. But the next night, the knock returned, 3 taps, faint but insistent. I tiptoed to the door and pressed my eye to the peephole. At first, I saw nothing. Then, slowly, something moved into view. A figure was standing at the very end of the hall. It was impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling, and its limbs were too long to thin. Even though it was far away, I could feel its eyes on me, sharp and unblinking. I stumbled back from the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I looked again, the hall was empty. The rest of the night passed in restless silence. The next day, I asked my neighbors if they'd seen or heard anything unusual. Most shook their heads politely. One elderly woman paused, her face growing pale. "You've seen it too?" she whispered. "Don't open your door at night, no matter what you hear." That evening, I triple-locked my door and shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. But as the clock crept past 3 a.m., I heard it again, 3 soft knocks, deliberate and patient. Then a voice, low and rasping, slid through the crack beneath the door. "I know you're in there." My hands trembled as I reached for my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, a shadow passed across the light under the door. Something scraped along the wood, long nails or claws. I couldn't tell. The voice came again, softer now. "Let me in. It won't take long." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After what felt like hours, the shadow lifted, and the hallway fell silent. When morning finally came, I checked the peephole. The hall was empty, but faint scratches marred the door's surface, long, deep grooves carved into the wood. I've since installed a second lock, a chain, and even a camera outside my door. But sometimes, around 3 a.m., the knocks return. I never answer, and I never look, because deep down, I know that whatever waits at the end of the hall isn't human.